Your assignment is to render two sides of a leaf. And that means that you need to really study it and figure out how to deal with all the variations. So what are the parts of this leaf? In the case of this hydrangea leaf, we have a midrib, and attached to the midrib are secondary veins. And then you can see there are very small tertiary veins. And between all these veins is the blade of the leaf, and that's what makes up the entire structure. And then on the underside, we have the same situation, but the veination is much more pronounced. We also have edges that have to be considered. These are a serrated edge in that they look kind of sawtooth. In order to do this, your leaf needs to be lit so that it is scientifically lit. You're going to have shadow on this side, highlight on this side, highlight on this side, and shadow on this side. Note that the blade of the leaf is composed of puffy sections called pillows. These will have their own highlights and shadows. Not all leaves will look like this when you have to render them, but this particular hydrangea has a great deal of variety in how the highlights form. So how are we going to go about drawing this? My suggestion to you is before you start to work on this leaf that you light it appropriately. You then need to photograph the front and you need to photograph the back. Notice on this side, the shadow is along the left side of the right blade, and the shadows will fall in slightly different areas because of the fact that the blade of the leaf in this case is concave, the veins are raised, and so the light hits the surfaces differently from the way they hit the surface on the front. So it's important that you have photographs of both the front and the back so that when you go to render, you will have a clear reference as to what you need to do. We will start by making a leaf rubbing because it's going to make it much easier to gauge the scale, to gauge where all of these serrated edges are, and also it'll tell you where the veination is. So that's the next step. You're going to have to secure this leaf so that it doesn't shift around on you, because the whole idea of doing the leaf rubbing is to get the proportions correct and to expedite the details. So just in a couple of spots, tape down the leaf so that it doesn't budge. The next thing you're going to do is put a piece of tracing paper over the top. And I'm using half the sheet because I'm going to use the other half of this sheet later on. Tape down the tracing paper so that doesn't shift around either. There are my little pieces of tape. Take a harder pencil. A 4H is probably the best thing, or a 5H if that's what you have. You're going to start to rub the edges and the insides of this leaf. Do not press too hard because you don't want it to be too dark, and you want to make sure you can see the veination and the edges when you're done. Now note, this is not going to be an absolute perfect replication because you've got heights that you're dealing with, but you can pretty much get what you need. Make sure you put an emphasis on the edges. Try not to tear your tracing paper, and use the side of your pencil to emphasize these edges and the veination, because this will give you a sound basis for what to do with this leaf when you have to render it. Now the leaf rubbing will give you an exact size, so you don't have to measure in this case, and it will save you a little bit of time. Just make sure you got some nice edges where you have structural considerations. Don't try using the point of your pencil this way because you'll penetrate the tracing paper. Now you can see I can't get all the way to the edges, but I'll have enough of the veins in the middle of the blade to figure out where I have to go from there to get to the midrib. So I'm going to continue doing this until I get all of my leaf rubbed and have all the veination in place. So this is what we do until we finish the entire leaf. Let's just check. So you want to hold your tracing in place and gently lift it up and see where you might need to re-emphasize the edges so that you have them clearly delineated when you have to use this. So now this can come off of here. So this is the back of the leaf, and this is our leaf rubbing. So this is the back of the leaf. Make sure you mark that down so you know what you're doing. Now the next thing you're going to do is you're going to take this and put another sheet of tracing paper over the top, and working with both the leaf itself and the transfer that you've done, you're going to start to do an outline drawing. And we know that you can see we only have a very thin line here, and yet this vein is quite thick. So we need to add to that. But you know this is the center line for it, so you're going to work on both sides of that center line in order to get what you will need in terms of information for this center vein. And you can look at it and say, all right, it's going to get thinner, it's going to get thinner. And then what's happening with the contour? So you want to follow using both your eyes and what you have transferred off here. And you can see, you can just barely see the ribbing, and this will help you get you the right shape for all of these contours on the leaf. So I'm going to continue to do this and finish off this initial step. And this is, in fact, an initial step to get you to the shape of the leaf that you need. Now you can also see here we have our secondary veins, and because you've rubbed them down, you know exactly where they have to go. Now this is still fairly rough, so you probably will need to do more work on this once you have this initial drawing created. So I'm almost finished at this point. Notice how thin my veins are, except for the midrib. So now we have a leaf that still needs a little bit more work. There are lots of veins here that I did not catch in the rubbing, but because you have some sort of a reference point for where to work, you can add in these divisions very easily in order to give yourself a good pencil. So there's your first drawing. Now this is the back of the leaf. You do not have to go through this process for the front of the leaf. Why? Because you can just take this and turn it around, and you have the front of the leaf. The venation doesn't change, it's all still there. You can maybe even see more of it on this side than you did on the opposite side. So you can add those in. Now, because this is the front of the leaf, you will have to do a separate tracing because the veins are much thinner on the top side. So the next thing we'll do is we'll make a tracing for the front. Again, we need to secure our tracing paper so it doesn't shift around. And now, using the front of this leaf, you can start to draw, and I would draw with a 4H pencil or a 3H pencil so that you get a single line drawing of what it is that you need in order to do this drawing. Start with my outline for the leaf and go all the way around following the contour that I have. And if you see any adjustments that have to be made, you make the adjustments at this point before you actually go to your drawing paper. Now you'll notice on this side, the blade kind of sits a little bit on top of the midrib, another characteristic difference between the front and the back. So that's why the midrib on this side looks a little bit thinner than the midrib on the underside of the leaf. And I would be almost inclined to not draw a double line in this case, but actually we're going to render it so that it looks like there's a double line. And we'll keep working on this. I'm using a single line, no sketchy lines. You want to be very decisive about the line direction that you're creating so that everything is exactly where you want it to be before you actually go to the drawing part of this assignment.